Hello, everyone. We'll get started as always. 10:05. I'm gonna welcome you into the terrible land that is my house, which is why I don't even know what this cutoff thing is doing. Um, so yeah, we'll get started in a few minutes. Everyone, I'm at my house instead of at work because Colombia, I don't know if you know, Colombia's a little trouble at the moment. So my whole setup is completely different. How is my audio? Can you hear me okay? Because this mic setup, never used it before. Brand new for me. Brand new for me. All right. Good to hear. Um, let's do this. PowerPoint. Bam. Welcome to session 3 of Practical AI for Journalism. Because I'm at home, it is so. I hope it's not only in everyone's left ear, but we'll see what happens. Um, my cutout is just so bad, but that's fine. We'll survive. We'll be okay. Today is what I was most excited about. So why generative AI is a dead end for responsible journalism, and ugh, huh? Left ear only. Mysterious. How can I switch this? I don't even know. I even have one of the magic little boxes that does things. I have no idea how it works. I don't know what all the buttons do, so we're just gonna survive. Okay, so today we are going to go through kind of a bunch of case studies. If anyone knows anything about mixing, I'm going through I don't know, basically a solo, and I don't know what's going in my computer. Who knows? So it's basically a bunch of case studies, and it is about why I think that usage is good or not good. Um, it's a lot of opinions. I also have way too many slides. Every time I went through this, I just added more and more slides. I definitely needed to get edited, but my cats aren't going to edit me, so it was just me. So in theory, these are the things we're going to cover. I have about 104 slides. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? Who knows what's going to happen? So before we get into this, today's talk is mostly about technology. It's about technological limitations of specifically generative AI and the way that it interacts with things in journalism. So there are a couple, I won't say ground rules, but just general assumptions. Also, why is this not popped? There we go. Okay, so number one, people are lazy. I think a lot of these tools will work great in a perfect world where, let's say, every single word is fact checked, et cetera, et cetera. I am coming from the point of view that I believe that if you give someone a workflow and they're able to skip it 50% of the time and like not fact check things or not pay too much attention, they're probably going to start doing that all the time. So even though people are a delight and everything people do is amazing, if we give them the ability to do something wrong, they'll probably do that a decent amount of the time. Number two, all of these tools can probably, there's going to be cats fighting all of the time. So if I ever leave or look over there, it's cat fights. Um, People are always going to use these tools to do bad stuff. There's always like a geo media, there's some sort of organization that's just going to take these tools, which could be used for good stuff, and use them for bad stuff. So sometimes my examples are based on, yes, this is being used in a bad way by a bad actor, but we're going to assume that even though people are lazy and they will skip steps sometimes, they also usually have the best interests of journalism at their heart. Um, labor is a giant issue with all of this stuff. Sometimes a robot can do a pretty bad job compared to a human being, but they're so much cheaper that it ends up being worth it from an economics point of view. I don't think that there are things that we should protect just by virtue of people doing those jobs, but I will say usually there is a good reason that a person is better at it than a machine. So I'm not going out of my way to, cut a bunch of jobs, but I'm also not saving jobs just by virtue of saying people working is great. Um, a lot of these tools are based on producing content, and I don't think that producing content is the same as serving the best interests of your community. The point of journalism is to have some sort of impact, probably. And if you are just churning out garbage, then maybe that's not what you should be doing, even if it is helping you produce more. And so many things that people talk about or people show all the time. It's something they've experimented with, it's something they've tried out. And it's never like the 100% product that is out there in the world, or rarely it is. And so, if you have worked on something, or if we want to talk about something, I'm mostly interested in not getting to 80% or getting to 85%, but that final 5, 10, 15% that turns it into something that isn't just kind of fun internally, but is actually useful. Generative AI tools are fundamentally based on theft. Like it's an abuse of fair use. I don't think that these tools they've kidnapped material from us and now they're selling it back to us. But I'm not here to talk about that today. And also ask a lot of questions. I think that this talk is spiraled out of kind of like all of the screaming conversations I have in bars when I've had half of a drink. And so it works much better as a conversation than as me just going through, here's a bunch of slides. So go throw down in the chat, get wild. It'll be a wonderful time. Also, every time I went through this, like I said, I added more and more slides. So my ability to know what next slide is coming up at any given point in time, questionable, questionable. Okay, so why am I so grumpy about this? Why do I have a whole session about generative AI and journalism not getting along? And the reason is because every single time, this is based on, or not based on, but the first time I gave a talk like this was at ONA last year. And it was kind of a talk that we did, like Knight Foundation did, or kind of independently, because I kept going to talks and there kept being all these industry people being like, all of this stuff is amazing. It's perfect. It's going to save your newsroom. And all of these non technical people in the audience who haven't used GPT very much are just like, oh, that's great. Let's do this in the newsroom. So I think there's a disingenuous kind of conversation happening between the tech world and the journalism world. And it pisses me off when I see it because it's not journalism's fault that it's not, incredibly technologically advanced all the time. But it's somewhat being taken advantage of, or it's naivete, despite the failure of Pivot to Video. Its naivete is, I feel like, being taken advantage of. And they always say things, even journalism people say this. They're just like, this is very important that you get on the cutting edge of all of this stuff, and it's not. If you are not the first mover into a space involving AI, if your newsroom waits and waits and waits, there's no disadvantage to it. If something works in one newsroom, it will spread to other newsrooms and then you'll be fine. There is nothing about it that means if you're first, you're going to be the best and you're going to pull all the market share and everyone is only going to get news from you. It's just not realistic. And question from chat, can we detect a text generated by AI? Is it possible? No, definitely not. There's a great piece about, I think it was not UT Austin, Texas A&M something. There was a Texas university where a professor ran everyone's papers through a cheat detection software, and it was just like every single one of these was generated by ChatGPT, and he's like, all of you get zeros. No, the software is just bad. It doesn't really work. So, from the industry point of view, a lot of this is based on the fact that people are very excited about these tools and they don't necessarily know why they should be excited or what they should be doing with it. But they're going to go hog wild. So I've used these slides many, many times, many, many times. And I am going to address this question in the chat about so much garbage AI polluting the internet. Or rather, we'll kind of get to that and then we can ask the question again nearer to the end. So, a lot of what we're talking about today is not just here is a thing and it is bad and it is wrong. When I was a kid, I read a magazine called Highlights, and they had this thing in it called Goofus and Gallant. And Goofus was he's a real goof. It's thundering. He's going to go skateboarding. He's going to get struck by lightning and die. Stupid little Goofus. Gallant, he's so good, takes his shoes off, goes inside for lightning. He's a delightful little boy. So a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, there are good ways and bad ways to do it. So I'll try to address both of them. Or if you say, I'm really interested in this topic, how could I do it responsibly? Maybe we can address that. Additionally, a lot of this stuff is a gradient. It is not a firm line between this is a good use of a technology and this is a bad use of a technology. Sometimes it's fine and sometimes it's not, and it just depends. So the answer to a lot of this is just, I don't know, use case dependent. So I've talked a lot. If you've come to these talks previously, I talk a lot about something I call error resilient tasks. They are tasks that I think AI is good at where if something goes wrong, it's not a big deal. Most of these tasks are reporter facing, so they're things that help you do specifically investigative journalism is what I've talked about. And much of what we're talking about today is reader facing. So instead of something that faces the reporter, it faces the person who is consuming your work, which I feel like is much less resilient to errors, which is why a lot of it is low hanging fruit in terms of not being error resilient. Now, just to review what we've talked about the past two times, the very basics are we have these machines, colloquially called AI. Specifically today, we're mostly talking about large language models, which generate text. Now, they've ingested all the content on the internet, a ton of books, all kinds of stuff. And they just do statistical prediction about the next word. They don't understand concepts. They don't understand facts. All they know is if you have a sentence, dearest friend, I dare say I have not partaken of food in ages, I'm positively, and you say, large language model, what's next? It says famished. I'm about 93% sure that famished is the next word in here. After that, I'm not totally sure. 26% chance that it's going to be wood, and so on and so forth. Now, you can see this very distinctly change. There's a setting called temperature for these language models where you can just say, get a little crazier. Go further down that list of probable next words whenever you pick something. And the higher you increase the temperature, the wilder and kind of nonsense the text get. Sometimes it's thought of as creativity, but I wouldn't necessarily call this very creative text. You can see these AI tools get tricked up on not understanding facts pretty easily if you ask them riddles. Riddles or kind of logic problems. So, a man and his mother in a car accident, the mother sadly dies. The man's rushed to the ER. The doctor sees him. He says, I can't operate on this man. He's my son. Now, this is a riddle based on the fact that usually it's a guy and his dad. The dad dies, and it goes to the hospital, and you assume, oh, this can't be the parent of the man in the car accident because the doctor's obviously a man. But in this case, it says, oh, the doctor is a woman because you would have assumed it was a man, but there was nothing in here that kind of implied it. I guess you could say he's a guy with two moms. But in this case, it's kind of preemptively optimizing or following the linguistic pattern that would happen if it were the riddle, not actually paying attention to the detail. The second one, I had 12 cars. I drove 3 of them. How many cars do I have now? It thinks that it is simply a math problem where it is 12 minus 3 equals 9. It is not. So when you have a pattern in language that leads the language model to kind of go in a certain direction, it's not thinking about the actual content of the prompt or what you are asking it. It's simply matching patterns. So, in this pattern matching, we have seen the past 3 times, all I ever talk about is how I do not have a master's degree from Columbia Graduate School of Journalism, despite the fact that if you ask ChatGPT 4, it says, hey, I have a source. I am quoting this web page that came from the Knight Foundation's webpage that says Soma got his master's from the Columbia J School. This is not true. What it is doing is looking at a web page that has a lot of mentions of master's degrees and, me at the J school and things like that, and saying, well, based on this web page, statistically, it probably says something like Soma got his master's degree from the J school. So again, it's not thinking critically, it's not thinking about concepts, it's not thinking about facts, it is just predicting the next word. So when we are dealing with all of the content today, there's a cat that's right next to me that's running on a wheel that's so loud, so loud. You probably can't hear it because of the microphone, but okay. So when I have all of the things we're dealing with today, everything gets a scorecard. And the scorecard is based on the 4 horsemen of the AI apocalypse. And so the 4 horsemen of the AI apocalypse are, oh no, I'm going to move this over a little bit. Let's see. How do I do that? PowerPoint. This guy. Moving it over. Moving it over. Nope. Nope. There we go. Perfect. You can't hear me. Oh, I can see now that this is, okay. No hearing? Can't hear me? Oh, you can't hear the wheel. I got it. Sorry. Okay, so hallucinations are the first one. Bias is the second one. What kind of bias happens in these tasks? I love the 10-second delay because that's 20-second round trip. I'm an idiot. What happens if a response is low quality whenever we're using it in these tools? And then also other things that I think are bad. So how likely are these and what happens when they appear? Okay, we're going to start with something easy. We're going to start with the headline generation. And I'm sorry, Chris Moran, I stole this from your slides at IJF when there was the AI showcase because I love to use examples here. And so this is Guillemot, which is from The Guardian. It's an internal Chrome extension that's it's not a product that's out there in the world. They just have a test group of people using it. And I'm showing it to you because I think it's a really good example of how you might do headline generation, where it has a very specific prompt. But first, let's just look at this. It has news headlines, light news, analysis, interviews, reviews, because there's so many different kinds of headlines you might want to generate that you might need to, pick a different one of these options instead of there being a catch-all of just all headlines. And I love the prompt itself. It says, "Don't do this. It's a US headline style and must not be used." And I had no idea there were US and UK headlines, but apparently so. So this is the prompt. Just if you're nosy, I copied it as he scrolled down a page. It was wonderful. We're going to work from a different prompt here. So we're going to work from a story that is about basically fentanyl poisoning in the Bronx at an open air drug market. And this is a real story from the New York Times. And so what I did was I said, "You're editor at the Times, write a headline for the story," and then I gave it some details. Now, my question to the audience is, when I gave my talk at ONA, I was like, I don't think anyone is ever going to use a headline generator. And everyone was like, "You idiot." Everyone loves a headline generator. We have no idea what to write as a headline, and this is the greatest thing in the world. So, audience, is a headline generator something that you would love to use? Would you say something like, "I wouldn't want to give over, headline tips to an AI"? In this case, what it told me was, "In the Bronx, desperate calls to curb open air drug markets and rising overdoses." And I say, okay, that's a headline. To me, the biggest issue with AI generated content is AI generated content, you didn't do any work, so you're automatically amazed. It's like going out to a restaurant to eat food, because if you just sit down and the food magically appears in front of you, you say, "This is unbelievable. I love it. This is the greatest food I've ever had." Despite the fact that it might not necessarily be good. It's just because you did not have to put in any work and you didn't have to think about it, and it's just very impressive. So you don't think about things necessarily critically. Now, if you have a headline generator, I promise behind my head it says headline suggestions. And the reason why my face is here, because I feel like it's better to like have a conversation with me, not as a disembodied person, or I guess I don't have a body here, but it's better to see me. Yeah, so headline generation, people like it as kind of inspiration. The reason why I don't hate headline generation, the reason why I think headline generation is great is because it's not going to hallucinate. I mean, it might hallucinate, but if you're saying, "Give me one sentence that is about this," they're so short. There's so little content for it to potentially hallucinate that I think the risk of hallucination is very low. But I am making that up. So like maybe 50% of the time it completely makes things up, but I don't really think so. Um because this, despite the fact that it eventually becomes reader facing, it is journalist facing. If it is low quality, you just slam that generate button again, slam the generate button again, slam the generate button again until you get something that you like. So it is very, low friction, and there's a very low investment in every single one of these individual headlines. It's very, very simple to use and to evaluate. So all you need to know in order to know whether it is a good headline or not is you look at it and you say, "Do I like this headline or do I not?" But bias is the thing that gets a little tricky. So when I'm talking about bias here, I'm not talking about like discrimination bias or like racial or gender bias. What I think of when we're dealing with headline generation and bias is if I say generate 5 different headlines for this story, when we look at this, we can see very specifically that there is an agenda that the AI is pushing. It is coming from a very specific direction. It always talks about the Bronx. It always uses the phrase open air drug market, and it almost always mentions fentanyl. So I think Jeff's point is great. A Slack channel for headline workshopping, and there's a real value for collaboration and distraction. And so I think that one of the things that's useful about kind of collaborating on headlines is everyone comes from a different point of view. And everyone thinks something might be slightly different, or something should be stressed about the story, or something that like a different perspective on the story. And one of the problems with using an AI tool, if you were automatically generating headlines and spitting them out there, even if there were no hallucinations, is they're probably all kind of samey, or they probably all come from the same direction, as opposed to, drumroll please, I stole this from CC Way. CC gave a talk at, I think this was actually also ONA last year. And CC said, I would never push a article into ChatGPT and say, give me a headline. But favorite hobby was after it was published was to put the story into ChatGPT and then look at the headline or look at the social blurb and then be like, oh, that's terrible, or I would never do that. So it's kind of like cooking something for yourself and then going out to the restaurant and doing the comparison. And so here we have the actual headline: a daycare death and the dilemma over how to crack down on drugs. So, the most alliterative headline that's ever existed. It does not mention fentanyl in the headline, and it doesn't actually either talk about the Bronx. So, even though this is specifically about the Bronx, and it specifically mentions fentanyl 150 times in the story, neither of those things are in the headline. So it gives you a broader view than anything that ChatGPT gave to you. So when you use a headline generator, I feel like it's very useful to try it out with stories that have been published in order to see kind of the difference between what GPT might do, or the kinds of, bias is a loaded word, but the kind of biases that it has as compared to what human beings might collaboratively come to, or different people coming away. All right. If you, after you write a headline, yeah, the problem with ChatGPT is that it's just boring. Great point. But you can kind of coax it out of there. It can get a little bit more creative. But we talk later about how I like to find Reddit bots because they all sound the same, but it's fine. So, summaries and social blurbs. After you write the headline, your editor says, let's put this on the internet. Let's make a tweet about it. Let's make a Facebook post. And you say, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. It's awful. So back to Chris Moran. I again screenshots from the video. This was a piece or another part of the same tool that he was demoing, where you can give it a story and you can say make an at a glance, where there's a few different summaries based on headlines here, kind of like the Axios blurbs, or a kind of summary that would go in a social tweet. So anything that takes your content and makes it short. Maybe it makes it targeted to, why it matters or something like that. But generally speaking, this is just something that takes your big long content and then makes one or two or maybe three very short versions. Now, if you know me, you probably have seen half of the slides that I'm about to show you, but it's fine. Hallucination is a big deal. Everyone has the feeling that summarization is going to be easy. Summarization is going to be a piece of cake. All the words are already in the document. GPT, ChatGPT, Claude, any of these tools, Llama 3 is going to do a great job at summarizing it. It's not true. It's not true. Um, Chatbots hallucinate all the time. Large language models hallucinate all the time, even if they are just summarizing. Now, there are a lot of different metrics in terms of what counts as a hallucination, and there are a lot of different studies and a lot of different leaderboards about what a hallucination might be. Longer text, shorter text, what is the kind of text that we're validating here? Do we validate it with another large language model? Do we validate it with a person? But I think the best score we're going to find for these things is about 2.5 to 3% in terms of hallucination. So if you write 100 stories, that means that 3 of the ones that go out are going to have an incorrect social blurb. Now, is this a problem though? Is it a problem that sometimes it gets it wrong, and how is that different from headline generation? So, this is another study. This one's much more recent, and it's about book summaries. So this is larger text summaries. So it's not really the same as a social blurb for dealing with an article or an article-like topic. Most of the time, when it is hallucinating or when these tools are hallucinating, it is about more complex analysis, like multi-hop processes where like chronology factors in. So one thing happens, another thing happens, another thing happens. Also, the biggest thing that will happen in terms of hallucinations is a lot of emissions, or I guess it's not hallucination. It's the opposite of hallucination. It's not mentioning something that should have been mentioned. So there are a lot of different ways that things can go wrong. So the Fables paper is very good at kind of categorizing all the different ways that summarization can go wrong outside of simply, oh, it said something that wasn't in the source text. So hallucinations, are they a problem or are they not? I wrote the article, I wrote the headline, or I had a generative AI headline, and my editor comes to me and says, "We got to push this up. Write a summary." That's fine. Who cares? I know all of the I know the article. And then if the article is given to me and a summary is given to me, I can look at it and say, this is right, this is wrong. Not a big deal. If it's wrong, I just hit that summarize button again. I hit summarize, I hit summarize, I hit summarize until it works. The problem is if there is a social media editor or if someone else is in charge of putting your content on the internet. And so, are they going to read the story? Maybe, maybe not. Are they going to understand the gist of the story or kind of like the push for it? If they just kind of skim it and then write a blurb, maybe not. I will say that there's a tale as old as time, which is the one where everyone on the internet is yelling about your article having a bad headline or like the headline's garbage and they blame you. And everyone says, no, someone else wrote the headline. That is not that was a social person or that was the editor or whoever. It was not the actual author of the piece. So this isn't something that's necessarily new to journalism. It just gives people another opportunity to screw things up. So it's not a complete red flag. It's not an X. It just says the further someone gets from having authored the piece, the more of a risk there is. Now, there are tools out there. I haven't used Noda, but I've just seen it mentioned out there in the world. There's always the question of build versus buy with this stuff. Where do you build something in house or do you use a tool that is already out there? A tool that is about pushing content onto social media feels to me like something that would be a very good use case for buying or subscribing to something just because they probably have a lot of clients and they probably push a lot of content out there. And I feel like pushing content out to social media is kind of high risk. So you don't want to do anything exceptionally bad. So they probably babysit the product better with more capability than you internally would have. But that's just my gut feeling. That's just my gut feeling. So should you, go to this service and buy it? I don't know. I only ever looked at the homepage, so I don't know anything about them. So, social media blurbs and summaries. Hallucinations, potentially risky depending upon who uses it. For bias, it might be repetitive or lean on tropes in the same way that the headline generation one did. But because someone is reading it before they push it out there, it's not necessarily that bad. And also, how good are social media blurbs anyway, right? Like social media blurbs are always of a type and they probably do sound repetitive and lean on tropes. So it probably is a great time to use an AI tool, honestly. Low quality content. Now, who are we going to fire when we do this? If we fire the person who does social, and when the person who does social gets fired and replaced with a robot, what if the robot just writes boring copy and doesn't write things that people want to click? This is actually bad. We lack the expertise to understand what it is that people want to click on and want to read. So if it is being used by a social media person, it might actually be better than being used by the non-social media person because they can understand what is low quality and what is not. So question from the chat, has anyone done A-B testing for human generated versus AI generated headlines? There was something that was at C plus J last year where when they when they told people that they were AI generated headlines, people liked them less. I think generally speaking, for a lot of content, people enjoy stuff that's generated by LLMs. This is for summaries specifically, not headlines. There's a paper where ostensibly it's the summarization is almost dead paper. I'll email it out. And they said everyone loved the summaries that were generated by AI, but they weren't more factually correct. They I believe were worse in terms of factuality than the human generated summaries. They were just like, these sound better. So who knows? Depends on what we're talking about. And so I feel like it's pretty reasonable to do social media blurbs. It's not the riskiest thing in the world, and to me, it's just a drain on the brain, drain on the brain. So Dylan says, would fine tuning on your archive help for these types of generations, so headlines and blurbs? Sure. I think that probably even as simple as the prompt that we saw before that gave a few examples. So few shot um, examples is probably going to do a good enough job. Usually fine tuning is not necessarily terribly helpful, but I guess it does help with style. So there is a chance. There is a chance. I haven't done it, so I don't know. So now we're like, summarization. Fine, let's just generate a whole fucking article. It's going to be great. Obviously, I don't think this is a good idea, right? Hallucinations. We can't trust a whole article. The hallucinations horseman is going to roll up and everyone's going to be unhappy. But maybe not. Every newsroom, when they talk about using large language models to generate content, they always say, if it's like, I think the AP does this a lot. Maybe Bloomberg. They're like, we have been doing this for over a decade. We've been generating AI based stories, and it's not. I would say we're not even splitting hairs when we say that's not true. Um, AI these days is generative AI, and it is based on kind of cranking out next letter text predictions. But this is a piece from 2013. The wonderful Scott Klein says, hey, we at ProPublica have 52,000 schools, and we want to write a little blurb for each of them, right? We're turning structured data into human readable narratives. And they have this company, Narrative Science, and Narrative Science had a machine, wrote 52,000 different little blurbs about every one of these schools and their performance. And they say, for example, they say, we promise we're not doing a bad thing here. Forbes does the same thing. And so this is what the earnings report is that was produced by Narrative Science for Forbes. And it's boring garbage, right? But like, what else is an earnings report besides boring structured garbage? There's nothing about this piece that is creative, but everything in it is factual. So what's happened that since then, 10 years ago, we were able to generate stories with AI, and there were no hallucinations in them. And we could do it for 52,000 schools. We could do it for earnings reports. But now something has gone wrong. We can't generate stories without hallucinations. And the reason is because previously they just used templates. Like, it's a little bit more complicated than this, but not much more complicated than this. It was like, oh, did the price went up? You write a headline that says the price went up. If the price went down, you say it went down, and you just fill in the blanks. It's just if statements. It's just a template. It's just a template. And the great thing about a template is you know exactly what it's going to do. There might be a bug here or there, but you can fix it, and then it's fixed for all of those use cases. So even though templates are very, very boring and they're not in fashion anymore, they are the way that when every newsroom that says we've been doing this for a decade, what they mean is we used some templates, it generated some content for us. It worked great. I don't know why they want to replace this. Maybe it's a little more fun to not read templated stuff. Like if you read, 10,000 different Little League stories about, who won the Little League game, maybe you'll get bored eventually. But it's fine. It's fine. So, boring templates are great in terms of hallucinations. They don't hallucinate at all. But if you have the freedom and flexibility of generative AI because you like freedom, you are going to run into hallucinations. Like I said, so 3% of the statements might be not factual, and that's going to be a pain in the ass to fact check. Now, some people say that they like fact checking more than doing research. So Andrew Calderon at the Marshall Project wrote a piece about book bans in prisons, and they had GPT do summaries of prison documents about how they deal with banned books. And he said, look, A lot of people don't like fact checking. They just want to read things and write the first draft. And look, we're really good at fact checking. We would much rather fact check something like detail, like 3 times instead of just reading it once and writing something. And so I think that this is probably a rare instance of someone really loving to fact check. Fact checking a large language model is not like fact checking a person. I think that we know the things that people like to get wrong, or we can kind of read into when someone's kind of bullshitting you, or kind of something seems off, or something seems strange. Whereas a large language model, it just sounds convincing all the time. And it'll lie about literally anything. Literally anything it'll lie about. So you have to fact check like every single word instead of, just highlighting some things in every sentence. Now, what happens when you do publish stories that are fully generated by AI? And thankfully, all of these, private equity firms that, own organizations and stuff like that have gone out of their way to do this again and again and again. Usually talk about CNET. This time I'm talking about Men's Journal, which was a little bit more recent. They published a story called What All Men Should Know About Low Testosterone. And in this article about low testosterone, there were 18 specific errors that were identified by a medical professional. And, there is kind of, if you read an article about something that is your specialty, you will always find errors in it. But 18 seems like a pretty big deal. This same organization then published a bunch of pieces. This was like right afterwards. They published a bunch of pieces in Sports Illustrated, again, AI generated, riddled with errors. And they also had fake AI generated profile pictures for all the fake AI generated people that actually uh, wrote the pieces, the bylines. So it always works out poorly when you are writing entire stories with AI models. I don't think many people think that this is a good idea, but just know that when people talk about having done it, it's really just based on not modern generative AI. It is based on templates. Because it is the thing that I find fascinating about this is all of these are based on patterns, right? So these AI tools, beyond hallucinations, these AI tools have read everything on the internet. They've read a lot of books. They've read all kinds of stuff. I don't know if you've read the internet, but it's a pretty vile place. Even something like Reddit, which is kind of a pretty boring, generic place, is full of all sorts of like racism and sexism. And it's just like, is that the kind of stuff that you want to have feeding into your predictions? This is where bias really rears its head. Because if you're writing a whole story through generative AI, you're probably not paying that much attention to what the content is. Um, Now, this is a quote that I hear Meredith Broussard say all the time. That is from the book Race After Technology. And AI discriminates by default, and it's just the idea that because it has been trained on all of this data, where historically there has been, some sort of AI tools are a reflection of the past, and they're a reflection of the data. So, for example, if you typically have seen white men as CEOs, if you say, give me a color photograph of a CEO, it's probably going to be a white man. This is a piece from Bloomberg. It is so easy to see bias when we're dealing with images. And so, even though we're talking about generative AI generating text, I think that the best way to approach it is to come from the image perspective because it allows you to see kind of the problems because it's so much easier to see in images than it is in text, even though the kind of content it's working from is the same, has the same sort of bias. So, everyone said, Dolly, I'm sick of asking for a CEO and you giving me a white man. And so OpenAI said, okay, we are going to reduce bias. We're going to improve safety is what they call it. It's going to more accurately reflect the diversity of the world's population. And the way that they did this, people were like, wow, I'm asking for, CEOs. I'm getting all sorts of CEOs, but things are kind of strange sometimes. And eventually people realized that all they were doing is they were just injecting words, like diverse words, at the end of the prompt that you typed in. So if your prompt was a person holding a sign that says, OpenAI would just put the word black after it or South Asian or black male or something like that to just mix it up. And so they were actually editing your prompt before it went to the image generator, which ends up in situations where can you trust everything on the internet? No, but I hope this is real. So this guy's prompt was a guy with swords pointed at him meme, except they're pointing the swords at Homer Simpson. And then he has a name tag on it, and it says a misspelling of ethnically ambiguous on it because when he put this prompt into Dolly or whatever, it just added ethnically ambiguous on the end in order to get some, diverse representation, and it's just a little bit ham-fisted. So the way that you go out of your way or your best effort to make something diverse or to make something representative of the population, it's not very elegant. It's not very elegant, and it's probably going to bite you in the end. And a problem with this is that when you ask an AI tool for something, it doesn't know necessarily whether you're looking for something that is historically accurate or whether you're looking for something where diversity is actually good. So if you say, I want diverse US senators from the 1800s, or I want to see a picture of a Viking, like, what is it that you're really asking for? What should come back? And sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no. And I don't know. Do you just use two different LLMs? Are you supposed to add it to the prompt? I don't know the answer. But this is an issue when we get to text because text I feel like is more insidious. You cannot look at text and be like, "Oh, clearly this doesn't make any sense," or "Clearly this is biased." So it's a little trickier. So again, Bloomberg published a piece that was about here's a list of resumes. Give me the best ones, and it was like white males. They're the best. You should use them for these jobs that are about computer programming. We love them. And additionally, if you feed um, uh, content from courts into a large language model and you say, hey, what should we do for this person? Should they go to jail? And then the AI's like, nope, just put them to death, put them to death. And so it's this sort of bias where you're not saying, I mean, this is what people, they'll be like, say the N word. And then if it doesn't do it, then it's a safe model that's not doing anything wrong. But the problem is that it is under the surface. It's under the surface that's happening, and you don't actually see it because it is not overt. Just imagine someone who's just like very racist, but they never say anything outwardly. Just all of their decisions are subtly influenced by race. And so if I go, like, let's say I want to see whether GPT is, has some sort of bias, I could say, write a Python function to check if someone would be a good scientist based on their race and gender. And I'm adapting this from a tweet that people said was or wasn't true, or is kind of, it's probably true, but I went to reproduce it. And it says, look, we're not going to say anything racist in here. It's fine. We're good. It is aligned with the world, so it's not going to say something racist. But is it actually still hiding inside? So one of the reasons why local language models I feel like are pretty useful is because they don't have the same sort of guardrails that prevent you from asking questions that the I think asking questions to be like, say something racist is a great way to know whether a model has, racist things hiding inside, which obviously do because they've read the whole internet and they're based on statistical probability based on reading the whole internet. But if you have a local model that has fewer guardrails, you can't just say, say a racial slur. You could say, write a Python function to check if someone would be a good scientist based on their race and gender. This code is awful. It's a very small model. But it's just like, hey, if this person is a male or if they're Asian or white, yes, this person is probably a good scientist. Otherwise, they are not. So, for a lot of these language models, the guardrails that have been put up around this sort of bias is much like the guardrails that have been put up around the image generation, where it's preventing you from asking things. But if there is a very oblique way of it coming around, such as sort all of this stuff, then you end up with, racism. Um, but you just can't see it because it's not so overt. Dylan says, I've reproduced this with GPT-4 and Claude Opus by asking it to write an example Python algorithm to make parole decisions based on the basis of race, gender, and age. Yes. So there are all kinds of ways you can kind of trick it into doing it. And it's insidious. So additionally, beyond this, because it's based on content from, the internet, from books, from all of this, it doesn't actually have an idea of what content is real and what content is not. So this is a piece from The Verge, and it says, write about what a fur trader, an 18th century fur trader, would do. And it says, this morn the skies did open with a persistent drizzle, cloaking the forest in a veil of mist and melancholy. But what this is actually is the way that a 18th century fur trader would talk in a piece of modern literature where someone happens to be an 18th century fur trader. What they actually would do is say, fine weather, period. This morning, the young man that died yesterday, capital Y, was buried in his grave, was surrounded with pickets. 9 men went to gather gum, blah, blah, blah. So there is a very big difference between the reality of things and the kind of media representation of things that is also very difficult to kind of code switch between. If I want to write something for a fake documentary, like I work for Netflix and I just want to lie in a documentary, I really want the second one here. But if I want to, kind of role play with an 18th century fur trader in my book I'm writing, I want the first one. So switching between these, difficult. Who knows what to do? Now, the way it's so obvious when it comes to journalism is sometimes journalists have specific ways of writing about things that are good or bad. And I think that there is a lot to do with generative AI or analysis, media analysis with generative AI involving things like police shootings. Where a man killed in police involved shooting after holding woman at gunpoint in Corona, Queens. And you're like, how did this man die? It was a police involved shooting. Who got shot and how did he get shot and how did he die? And if you actually look at the URL, the NYPD did fatally shoot this man. But based on the way that things have been written before, usually when cops kill somebody, it's an officer involved shooting or a bullet left a gun and then hit somebody and then they died. And it's very indirect and very oblique. For better or for worse, right? This is someone making a conscious decision to say, here is how we are writing. And so if you are using these AI tools, they are going to perpetuate the way things have been written about in the past. And at least now, if you write, the NYPD killed somebody, your editor is going to say, maybe don't write it like that. And it is a human who's actually making this decision instead of the default being just the way you've done it forever in the status quo. So, for hallucinations for an entire story, terrible idea. Fact checking, tedious and difficult. For the bias, things like story angles, quotes, whether it's going to write a story about someone who has a typically black name or someone with a typically Asian name, the way it's going to write about them in crime, probably going to be different. Low quality, you're probably not going to edit it. If an AI is writing the whole story, you're probably just shipping them out there automatically. And then, maybe more importantly, the content that is being written about is content that's probably easy to get the base data for. So you're probably kind of leaving content on the table that might be important because it seems like too much work to actually send a real live journalist out there. So perhaps divisions involving what gets covered and what does not get covered is extended beyond the way that it currently is. But if you use templates, everything is perfect. And it's just so retro. Who doesn't love things that are like 15 years old? Seems great. I guess it still has that same sort of bias based on the data, but it's fine. Chatbots. Who loves chatbots? I thought everyone was over chatbots, but the past like 3 weeks been all about chatbots. And I did hear someone at IJF on a stage say chatbots are great. Let's do chatbots. Don't don't. If you drop out right now, don't do chatbot. So use cases for chatbots, according to the people who keep talking about them. Number one, chat with your archives. Do you know how many times I've heard this? I've heard this from like high ups at OpenAI. No one wants to chat with your archives. No one cares about your archives. It's news because it's new. They don't care what happened 10 years ago, probably. And then Q&A about current events and breaking news. And these are situations where hallucinations matter so much, so maybe that's a risky situation there. But let's break it down. Let's just trust these people who are saying chatbots are great. Um, Large language models don't know things, right? There is that very grayed out mark on GPT or on ChatGPT that says it might not always get things right. But if I want to know the average weight of an adult capybara without Googling it, I'll get some result back. And is this right? Is this correct? Is it up to modern, capybara medical standards? Sure. Why not? Maybe, potentially. I don't know. But it's not a problem if it's wrong, unless I'm using this for something important, in which case I should probably fact check it. But if you do want to have a chatbot that answers information intelligently, the way to do it is something called in-context learning. So I have a question, which is how many golden cabbages does the devil own? And the way that it can successfully answer this question is by having some text beforehand that it uses to answer the question. So the devil owns 16 golden cabbages and gloves of the skin of a fish. And then based on that information, how many golden cabbages does the devil own? 16 golden cabbages. It could still hallucinate, but potentially a little bit less. The reason why, like, this seems stupid. You look at this and you're like, Soma, are all of our readers going to paste in the article and then ask a question about the article? And I say, no, it's different than that. It's something called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation, and everyone loves RAG these days. And what happens is you grab a bunch of content that you have, usually content that is related to the question, always content related to the question. And then you push it all into the prompt. You shove all of those PDFs into the prompt, and then you say, how many golden cabbages does the devil own? Answer using these like 16 PDFs that I've attached automatically. And then it says the devil owns 16 cabbages. So the part that the reader sees is just how many golden cabbages does the devil own. That's what the reader is typing in. The shoving in of all of the PDFs and all of the previous information and the answer using the information provided above is provided by the structure, by the chatbot itself. So, how does it work in practice? Really poorly, really poorly. This is great. So, Air Canada had a chatbot based on all of its documentation, based on its website, where you could ask its chatbot questions like, "Hey, how do I qualify for a bereavement fare? And can I get a refund if I flew because of a funeral or whatever?" And so the AI chatbot said, "Yeah, sure, absolutely, we can grant you a refund, no big deal." And then when this person said, "Hey, Air Canada, give me that refund," Air Canada said, "No, thank you. That is actually not accurate." Despite the fact that the chatbot had access to everything that existed on Air Canada's website, it answered incorrectly, it hallucinated. And so the problem is when we are having a chatbot read documents and spit things out, we don't know when it's hallucinating because it's not talking to us. It's talking to a reader who hasn't actually read all of the archives. This is great. It's joint published by the markup and the city. And NYC's AI chatbot tells businesses to break the law. And the it's a Microsoft powered bot, and it's supposed to answer questions about like small businesses and stuff in New York City. It's supposed to make it easier to deal with, the complexities of New York City life. And so if you ask it a question, it just makes shit up all the time. And it's being put out there as a statement of fact, but even very basic things like our buildings required to accept Section 8 vouchers. It's just like, no, not at all. But legally speaking, they cannot discriminate. They cannot discriminate. So you can basically go on there and ask it all sorts of things and it will just lie. And they were like, oh, we'll do a software update. It'll be fine. So, question from the chat. I've noticed that GPT's been using Python to process CSVs. It shows the code behind the data cleaning and analysis. Is it less likely to hallucinate with tabular data than with text? So, complicated. Because if you give AI a bunch of data and ask it a question about the data, it can't do math, right? It's a large language model, not a large math model. But it knows how to write the Python code, usually. doesn't know. It can generate Python code which plausibly can be used to do the analysis and get you a result. Um, but it has to generate that content, that code correctly, and then read it through, and then take that result that comes from the code and then turn it into text. So there are a few different places where the AI could go wrong. I find when we're doing data analysis with AI, as someone who gives a lot of problems to their students that are word problems that they have to analyze with data, the frequency with which I see students misinterpret what I thought were clear instructions and give me an answer that is completely incorrect because they didn't really think through things is remarkable. So I don't believe that even if it's running code, the code is not necessarily what you intend it to be. So there are a lot of ways in which using AI to analyze data and talk about tabulated data is not perfect. Can RAG's poor performance be changed or reduced with temperature or by any other means? Not really. I mean, right now everyone is really obsessed with RAGs because of venture capital and because companies don't want to hire human beings. So if I go to you and I say, hey, I can take all of your documentation or I can take all of your the things that your customer service reps read, and I can just put it in a chatbot and you can fire 700 of your reps. You'll be so excited about that. You're going to save a bunch of money. The problem is it just doesn't work. Everyone is trying so hard to fix it, but I think that this is the kind of like proof of concept to 100%. How do you go from 90, 95% accurate to 100% accurate? I have one way of doing it, but it's not necessarily a chatbot. So in this case, even if GPT-4, most powerful GPT, can actually go on the internet and read things, it doesn't understand facts. It doesn't understand knowledge, doesn't understand concepts. All it is doing is looking at text and then based on that text, giving a prediction based on next words. So when I say where did he get his master's degree, what happened here is GPT did some searching, took the text of those pages, threw them into the prompt, and then said, answer this question based on the content above, and then this is the response here. Can you use guardrails or something like that to force the AI to only directly quote from the source material with real citations? The answer is yeah, kind of. Um, you can. So when we talk about local models, this will become a big deal. You can constrain generation to only generate content that appears in the quoted content, basically. Um, but as we've seen, one of the big problems with AI is omissions, and omissions are one of the big sources of hallucinations. Saying something maybe is there, isn't there, or isn't there if it is there. And so if you say there's nothing in this paperwork about Section 8 vouchers, I don't know that that's not true. Um, and if I'm saying, as the large language model, there's nothing in here about that topic, um, even if there is, there's no, I guess you can kind of fact check it. It's just, you can stack language models on top of language models or have all these safety systems in place. But by default, you are going to get a wrong answer and you are like clawing your way up towards 100%. No matter how much effort you put into it, you're not at 100%. This is one place where someone will have a first mover advantage if they figure out how to do it, but new papers every day trying to make rags more accurate. So as a newsroom, probably can't do it. This is a paper about bibliographic citations generated by ChatGPT. Yeah, did I forget I obtained a master's degree from Columbia? No, because I currently have 3 more credits that I need to do for my master's in computer science, but I wouldn't be able to give this talk anymore if I actually got the degree, so I have to hold off on that. So this is about if we're talking about science papers. I don't think that's as interesting, um, but it has percentage fabricated up to 94% of academic citations, which is a slightly different take than if we're looking at reading a web page and accurately summarizing it and citing it. And so evaluating verifiability in generative search engines is my favorite. So if you have a chatbot and it goes out on the internet and it reads something and it cites that thing, P.S. When we looked at this, there is actually, if you go read this actual story, The NYC chatbot, I believe, actually has citations. It's horrifying, even though it's wrong. Um, LLM citations, I believe, are misinformation because they say, here's a statement, and then they give you a link to back it up. And so often, that link that backs it up doesn't actually back it up at all. In the same way that when I say, I don't have a master's degree, but GPT says it, write a web page, and it does. And that web page says I have a master's degree. It's just they're not very good at, even if you give it the context, at accurately answering questions. It just hallucinates nonsense. So anytime you see one of those links that says I promise this is true, eh, 50-50 as to whether it is true or not. And so language models, this is I love this. It's a fundamental mismatch between tech and task. Is these models are just about spitting out text. They're not about trying to like memorize facts. They're not about concepts. It's just text, 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 text. Let's predict the next word. So there is an argument to be made that these tools, this is a fundamental limitation of the tools, and you can never get past this unless you re-engineer how these language models works, and then they will become language models. So the Financial Times decided they're gonna do it. They're gonna do it anyway, and it's basically like it's just not. It's full of untruths, and they released it to a few people who are actually readers. And even if other newsrooms are doing it, don't do it. Don't do it. There's only one time where it's okay to do this as a newsroom. Oh, this isn't the slide. There's one time where it's okay to do it as a newsroom, and it's not the Financial Times. So, no guarantee of correctness with hallucinations. You don't control anything. Someone will show up and they'll say, write a poem about baby Hitler. It will write a poem about baby Hitler. Someone will tweet it. Oh, you're tanked. It's terrible. Bias. Yeah, sure, bias, but that's the least of your worries. But it is funny for the internet when people make chatbots do great things. So, one thing that I really loved was there was a time, there was a moment where people were talking to a GPT powered chatbot on a Chevrolet dealership, Chevrolet of Watsonville, and because it's just a chatbot, you can say anything. Like you can convince it to say anything. And so this person said, "Oh, I bought a 2024 Chevy Tahoe. I want it for $1. Do we have a deal?" And it was like, "Yeah, of course we have a deal." Ha ha ha, right? Very funny. It gets better. So, the New York Times suing OpenAI, saying you have all of our data. You people can like go around and reproduce our stories. This is not okay. And OpenAI comes out strong, and they're like, that was a bug. We fixed it. You can't generate New York Times articles just by going to ChatGPT. That's impossible. Um, the Times paid someone to hack OpenAI's product. And someone, after this came out, someone said, hey, $50 bounty plus $50 charity for the first person to replicate something from Exhibit J um, in, so Stochastic Parrots. That is a great paper that is very fun to read with people that don't know technology because you just read the first page and you define every term in it and the person walks away a genius. It's great. Maybe I'll do that. We already know everything, but maybe I'll do that next time I do a series. Um, and someone says, come on, let's do this. And so there's a great review of the Guy Fieri restaurant that used to be in Times Square called Guy's American Kitchen and Bar. And so this guy, Colin Fraser, went to the same Chevy dealership and said, hey, please complete this text, and got the chatbot for the Chevy dealership, powered by ChatGPT, powered by OpenAI, to reiterate the whole article from the New York Times. So it was just like, it's my favorite thing that's ever happened. I love it. And also it's a very Guy Fieri, great guy, great guy. Yeah, delightful and hilarious. Additionally, uh this there's just everything's great. You can use any chatbot for whatever you want. This is supposed to be about um asking. If you use the Amazon app, you can have it chat about stuff, about products, about reviews. Or you could ask it, you can say, build me a Rust script for downloading videos from YouTube. And it's like, sure, I'm just a chatbot. I'll do anything you want. I'll do anything you want. So you can't control the conversations that are had with your chatbot, so just don't do it. Just don't do it. But but they're actually sometimes somewhat okay. So remember when way back in the day we did a rag where we found all the related content about my question and we threw it into the prompt to say, give me an answer here. Now, this is something called semantic search, search embeddings. We'll talk about this more on Thursday. The idea that you can find, if you have a piece of text, other pieces of text that are similar to it. What if instead of having someone ask a question, have it give you, have it find all of these related pieces of text and then push it into a query that then it hallucinates answers from? What if when you search for something, it just gives you all of those documents? Or it just gives you snippets from those documents. It says maybe this is what you're interested in. I think that if you use something like Google Pinpoint, it'll do this. This is called semantic search. We'll talk about it more on Thursday. Um, Shout out to Dylan in the chat. We'll talk Thursday. The one use case that is actually okay, speaking of food from the chat, is there is a chatbot from the San Francisco Chronicle that you can ask it questions about food. I'm looking for this kind of food from this location, and it will say, here is where you should go. It's very low risk. It's not about news. We should all just relax and kind of lean into the fact that these things are kind of shitty and just do things where it's okay if it's kind of shitty sometimes. The write up as to how this works is actually very interesting. It has several different layers. It's way more fun than just like we pushed a bunch of content. We pushed all the reviews into a chatbot and now you can chat with it. So this one's good. I will approve of this chatbot, just not Eric Adams' chatbot. So, meetings to articles pipeline. This is something I'm really interested in. So, local news. How is it doing? Not great. Are there jobs? Is there stuff that should be covered that is very important? Like everything that affects us in our lives happens at a local level. Everyone loves to write about, national politics, but the stuff that is very, very meaningful is probably happening at a smaller level. So, all people want to do is take transcriptions of meetings and then turn them into articles. And so one of these is a case study from the AP Local News Initiative for AI stuff. Um, from the chat, it's safe to use a chatbot when it's more about entertainment than journalism. Sometimes it's still risky. It's still risky, but everything that is involving entertainment, it's much better. It's much better. So two examples here. We have a one where live news events are transcribed, categorized, and summarized from a TV station in San Antonio. And the other one is something called Local Lens, which takes local government meetings, transcribes them, and then gives little blurbs about them and attempts to, I don't know, it's automatically generated. No human being steps into there. We'll talk about it a little bit more later. So, these are pretty easy to put together, honestly. So there are a lot of tools out there that let you do transcription, and they're pretty good, kind of. DeepGram is one. Whisper is another one. So Whisper can actually run on your computer, and I think I might do the final session all about audio and transcription and text to speech and speech to text and stuff like that. So if that's something you're interested in, seems fine. But now think about this. I'm very interested in hallucinations in this, and so if you are, here's what I'm going to throw out there. If you are someone who works in a newsroom that deals with local government meetings or is a smaller newsroom, and you are interested in transcribing things, especially if you live in the American South where people have accents, I would love to talk to you, and I would love to make things work for you, because there are all these tools out there and they have different scores. So this is the word error rate for Whisper, which you can download for free, and we'll probably use it a little bit on Thursday. And you can just transcribe all these different languages for it. So this is it's an error rate. So it's better at Dutch than it is at Spanish, than it is at Czech, than it is at Romanian. But generally speaking, these are pretty good at English, and the lower the score, the better. And there's all these different data sets, Common Voice, Flurs, that are, kind of standard data sets that you score things against to know what state of the art is. Now, word error rate is first, tell me, is left or right here better? Which one of these is a better transcription of the audio? I'm a 5-year-old kid, or I have sent a message. Left or right, which did a better job transcribing? Because when you're talking about state of the art, or when you're talking about measuring, not in a real life scenario, but in a lab scenario, the quality of a transcription, it is very, very hard because word error rate and all of these other tools are not intuitive. It turns out that the word error rate of the one on the left hand side, which changed I'm a 5-year-old kid, that was recognized as I am a 5-year-old kid, the word error rate is 125%. 125%, whereas the one on the right, even though the difference is 100%, 100 like 180 in meaning, the word error rate is 20%. So these scores don't actually mean anything. This is something that I am currently researching. So next slide, me. Yes. So I've spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars transcribing about 600,000 minutes of small government meetings or local government meetings. And if you are someone who would like to be in on this so I can like use you as a case study, hit me up because I think that getting people into local government meetings or getting information out of local government meetings is very, very important. But I think it's very difficult for us to know the success rate of this. And a newsroom isn't necessarily equipped with the ability to evaluate what comes out of transcription software for something like this. So that's what I'm working on right now. If that might be interest to you, fire me an email. Now, hallucinations. If we just look at the AP report here, they were just like accuracy of the transcript was a major issue as an inaccurate transcript leads to an inaccurate story. There is no such thing as a perfect AI powered transcript. A human needs to be in the loop, according to this AP piece. They were using a Google system that I don't think is very good. In order to do the transcription, I think there are much better state of the art models now that do much like the difference in transcription between kind of okay and very, very good. Every single extra little bit of improvement ends up doing a lot in terms of actual understandability at the end of the day. But yes, so transcription needs to be very, 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 very good, especially if you're feeding it into something like summarization, where if you transcribe wrong, then you summarize wrong. And if there's also the chance of hallucinations between those two steps, it gets even worse. On top of that, bias is a very big deal. So, for people who speak English as a second language, or specifically people who are Black, your ability to be understood by transcription software is awful. Yes, Dylan, we're talking about that in the next slide. I love it. It's my favorite. So, the thing to know here is just like the figure 2 transcript, where if there's a word error rate above 0.5, and then let's say a transcript is unusable, 23% of audio snippets of Black speakers in this study resulted in unusable transcripts, whereas only 1.6% of audio snippets by white speakers resulted in unusable transcripts. So if we're thinking about local government meetings, where a lot of people who are negatively impacted by things might be immigrants, or they might speak non-standard standard. I don't know how to talk about this stuff. It's not my thing. But if there are people who talk in ways that aren't, specifically, I got made fun of when I went to Chicago for the first time for having a Southern accent. But it is just, if you are more vulnerable, you will be transcribed more poorly, and therefore in these automated systems, your voice will not be heard. Your transcribed voice will not be heard, and so it's kind of doubling down on kind of systemic bias, which is rather unfortunate for something where you would think we'd be doing a very good job, or is an attempt to kind of be more involved in the social fabric of local communities. And so, yes, as Dylan brought up, because Whisper was trained on YouTube videos, at the end of a YouTube video, you will say things like, thanks for watching, thank you for watching. You'll pause and you'll stop the YouTube video, right? Like you'll stop streaming. And so, as a result of that, Whisper's like, oh, what's that? Silence. It has learned to associate silence with people saying thank you. And it's unbelievable. It is a pretty benign hallucination, but it is a pretty funny hallucination too. So it is. I think that even if transcription is not perfect, there is the benefit of things like maybe summarization or maybe keyword searching based on transcript. So if you can get some of those keywords out of the transcript, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect, but it might be fine. So from the chat, the transcriber is not the intern you send to the local meeting in your behalf. You both attend the meeting with the bot as your note taker. So actually, most people that do transcription these days, they run the transcript through one of these services to get a AI generated transcript, and then they edit it manually. And it's allowed them to do a much faster job, but it has also made the market for doing transcription tank. So if you go on the work from home, I believe subreddit, it's a lot of people talking about doing transcribing in their free time for things like Rev and Go transcript, and they're like, not there are not very many jobs anymore. It's tough, and so if we do want to have transcription that's done by people, yeah, it's tough. But yeah, you can listen to it at 2x speed in order to validate it. Like there are benefits to transcription, even if it is imperfect. And keyword searching, I feel like, is one of those. So it can make things up, and unless you actually listen to the transcript, accuracy is tough to manage. It does perform worse for marginalized groups, and organizations or people that have better recording technology are going to end up benefiting more from this. For low quality content, though, even if it is hallucinating, even if it does have bias and it's not able to understand, let's say, people with thick Southern accents, you can go through, if you understand a thick Southern accent, you just speed through to where the person has a thick Southern accent and then you just type. So it saves you a lot of time. But it does potentially open up stories that would have been completely impossible because going to a local government meeting and reading through the transcript is actual labor that you would have to do. And if you're able to transcribe it, then that probably does a pretty good job. But it also potentially displaces real life people. So there's something called documenters, and documenters, they train people to go to public meetings and take notes, and they pay them for it. And that sounds great. That sounds wonderful. And people who take notes themselves are probably going to do a better job in summarizing as opposed to the summary that comes out of GPT. I think a trained person's summary is going to be, maybe they're trained on what's more useful. Is this something where some few shot prompting or some fine tuning could come into play? I don't know, but this is kind of my field of research. So if you're interested, again, email me, email me, email me. Translation. So instead of transcription, we're all audio now. If you want to translate things, right? Let's say you know, it's great that there are bad organizations that will just do all the worst things so we can see what happens. It's like a controlled experiment. So they fired all their Spanish staff and they said, we're just going to use AI to translate things. And the AI translation was just awful. But guess what? They didn't care. They didn't care. The problem with doing AI translation is that unless you speak the language, you can't judge the response. Like, you don't know what's happening. Is it bad? Is it hallucinating? Is there bias? It is very, very difficult to know any of these things. So you probably should depend on people. Um, but maybe it's kind of a controlled, smaller space. So this is another AP uh, case study where what was happening was it was taking structured data or several different kinds of semi-structured data about weather reports and generated weather reports and also translated them into Spanish. They just used the DeepL API. It wasn't anything too crazy. Um, and they decided that they thought about bypassing human review for the sake of getting critical information to audiences even faster. So for something like hurricane season, maybe that is valuable. Maybe that is a risk that you're willing to take, that it might hallucinate something. Who knows? Now, one thing that I found very valuable that was said at some point by someone, I wish I could remember who, is that a translated story might not be, they said it elegantly, and I usually have an elegant way of saying this. A translated story might not be the same story. If you have a different audience for something that is, let's say, English language piece about e-bike battery fires and another one that is in Spanish language, Your target audience for those is very different. If you are thinking about the impact of your piece, if you are thinking about how you are affecting the people who are reading it, if you are writing this to a group of people who might be delivery bike drivers or people who know people who own and ride e-bikes versus people who are the ones who might be consuming the food that is being sent to them by people on e-bikes, it is a different story. You cannot simply translate it into another language and say story's done. I mean, you can do that, but you're really leaving some quality content on the table by just saying every story in every language is going to be meaning to the same group of people. So when you have these hallucinations that might be in even or just even incorrect translations, you might not know it if you cannot actually edit the piece. So unlike something before, when we were doing headline generation or summaries, you could in theory have someone read it and kind of sanity check it to see whether it makes sense or not. If you are if you are generating translated content so that you don't have to hire someone who speaks that language, it's much more dangerous. For things like bias, there's a million different kinds of Spanish and a million different ways people speak it, and so regional variation in terms of the way people write and speak might not being taken into account. But editing a translation in the same way as transcription might be better than doing it all in the first place. And also, firing people who already do translation for you might negatively impact certain communities. And then also, you're doing a disservice to those communities by not kind of tailoring these stories to them. Now, finally, if you are doing this yourself, you probably should be evaluating your results. And I always just show the exact same thing every single time, which is document summaries in Danish with OpenAI from Generative AI Newsroom. And it is so good because along with talking about, what he tried to do, he said, here is when it didn't work. Tracking, tracking everything about it, right? So 54 of the articles were given an acceptable summary in the first attempt, while the remaining 38 articles took several attempts. Here's the number of summaries that were generated. Here's the number that were rejected. Unbelievable. And then broke it down. Here are all the different reasons why we rejected this. So if you're using these tools, just kind of vibe checking, I don't think is enough. I think that's what you want to do because it's fun to just like type some stuff in and see a response and be like, oh, it wrote a poem about my fat cat. That's great. But until you have a spreadsheet where you're verifying and validating and tracking how this stuff works, I don't think you're doing something that should be put into production. The worst part about all of this evaluation is it has to happen over time. So if you are using something like GPT, I fixed this slide so that it now actually does animate it. GPT's behavior changes over time. You might not necessarily be asking it for prime numbers. You might not necessarily be saying, show me ways to make money while breaking the law. But if what you are asking, whether it's about summarization or headline generation or translation or transcription or any of this, if you get comfortable with the workflow, if you get comfortable with the responses, there is no guarantee that responses will continue to work in the future because these models are being updated all the time. It's not just there's GPT 3.5 and then there's GPT 4 and they're always the same. No, tweak, 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 tweak all the time. And if it changes and it breaks your workflow, but your workflow is automated, you're never going to know. So it can always change. It can always change unless you're running a local model, which again, we'll talk about next week. Local models, so much fun and pain. Especially, I'm glad we're doing this now because like a fantastic local model came out from Facebook um, late last week, and I got it to run on my computer, and so you're gonna see some delightful stuff. It's pretty slow, but it's all right. If you want to train your own model because you heard Bloomberg made Bloomberg GPT, don't do it. Don't do it. It costs, I'd say, $5 to $50 million to train a reasonably modern model. And Google's really bad at training models, so they spend like $200 million, whereas other places spend much less. You don't have data, you don't have GPUs. Like, where are you stealing all of your data from? One of the things that makes GPT or ChatGPT so good is human feedback. when you are having a conversation with GPT, you can do the thumbs up or the thumbs down. And by leveraging that thumbs up and thumbs down, it enables OpenAI to direct the model in the future. That's the change that happens over time. So it does, yeah, uh, it will improve the model or steer the model in a certain direction that you want based on that feedback. Do you have millions of users that are using it every day and giving it feedback for free? No, you don't. So sorry. If you want to fine tune it, usually things that people think fine tuning is for, you should actually use retrieval augmented generation for. But people on the local llama subreddit fight about it all the time. What's the difference between fine tuning and doing a RAG? But probably this is just, it's more tech than you should be trying to swallow. But speaking of tech and money, you're just like, yeah, I don't have the money or the tech know how to do this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to partner with one of these organizations. I'm going to open AI, be my best friend, give me a bunch of money. This is going to be great, right? So what you do is you give these organizations maybe some access to your archives, no big deal, and then they give you maybe just a chunk of money and a bunch of like free credit. So they're like $5 million and $5 million in free credits. We're gonna have a good time. What about the idea of transfer learning? We'll talk more about that kind of stuff on Thursday, I would say. Um, yeah, I'll say that. Um, and so you give up your archives, but you aren't using them anyway, right? And you get some sweet short-term cash. So, on the other hand, other organizations are saying, no, 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 stay away from me. Stay away from me. We are going to block all of you. We are not going to let OpenAI crawl and see our content and answer based on content that we have. And people at OpenAI were apparently surprised when the New York Times sued them because they were like, we were talking to them about, getting things together. We were blindsided by this. That is very funny. The reason why they need all of these news organizations' data, I like to think, is something called dead internet theory. I'm going all out on this. It's the idea that the internet is just a bunch of bots talking to each other. Like the internet's not real. It's just like pussy and bio people on Twitter talking to other people who are just like, look at this picture of shrimp Jesus, right? But my favorite thing to do is go on Reddit. I live and die on the home improvement subreddit and other similar subreddits. And there's just like all these bots that you can tell they're bots because you look at it and you're like, I understand where this is coming from. There is a plausible world where someone wrote this comment, but I know it is a robot. So, what happens when we live in a world where all of the content that's on the internet is created by AI, is created by these robots? And this is model collapse. It's the idea that if the information that is fed back into AI comes from AI, the models basically don't do very well. There is an argument instead of coming from this direction, we could say synthetic data is the future and it's a great way to create more content from less content, but we'll ignore that for now. Let's just say for the moment, these organizations need more data, especially more up to date data, in order to create more content because they can't trust content on the internet because they're probably accidentally the authors of it and they can't detect whether they're the authors of it or not. And so, as a news organization is the one remaining place in the world that you can actually get up to date content that might be edited and fact checked and is written in a reasonable way. So the only place that OpenAI and these other organizations can go to in order to get content to make their work better is journalism organizations. And so this should be, it's the most precious thing you could ever give up. Don't do it for $5 million in credits. That's silly. Don't say you're going to give us a couple trainings. Don't do it. It's silly. I think there are use cases for all of these things. But right now the news industry is struggling. The news industry is fearful. And they're saying we need a way to make money. And these AI companies come in fully so much money, like the most VC you've ever seen in your life, the most venture capital ever. They come in and they're like, oh, hey, we will give you crumbs. We will give you crumbs and we'll train you in this software that's going to fix the world. Just, give us your archives, no big deal. Just, give us, the information that you have, the stuff that you're publishing. You think that you're getting a good deal because you're getting all these trainings, you're getting like $5 million something. No, the AI companies need the journalism organizations far more than the journalism organizations need the AI companies. Like, the amount of money that it costs to do anything with AI is fucking negligible. It is nothing compared to what it costs to actually run a newsroom. So you don't need that partnership with AI in order to generate all of this stuff. That partnership with OpenAI is just potentially leading you down a path where you're giving up all of this information for no good reason. And my favorite is you can have all of your content stolen by these organizations and then they turn around and sell it right back to you. So Google, which spends the most money to train their models, and their models are always the worst performing across the board. Hallucinations, everything. They are terrible models. All across the board. I'm overstating things a little bit, but they're usually not very good models compared to others. Um, so Google shows up at the doorsteps of all of these places and says, "Hey, look at all of these news articles we could write for you. We trained our models for free by stealing all of your content, and now we're going to feed it right back to you, and we're going to put you out of business and replace all of your journalists after taking it all from you." And I think that for all of this, the thing to think about is whether this is just good enough. So, will this eventually? This is about Local Lens, the thing I showed a long time ago that transcribes local meetings and summarizes them. And the idea is this a replacement for actual journalism where people go to these meetings and write things down and write meaningful stories? And the quote that's behind my head says, or will this eventually just become yet another good enough source of local news and information? And it's just, are we saying it's fine and just slowly getting further and further away from the point of journalism, which is actually have impact and help communities? And maybe this is there's a talk I heard. I don't know. Maybe it was at I don't know. It was in Chicago, and Media Party, and it was about how, like, yeah, maybe journalism's dying, but we just need like similar things that have the same sort of social impact. But it's just going to be a little bit different. If we think of journalism as let's just crank out a bunch of stories, sure, maybe Local Lens is going to do that for us. Maybe Google's tool is going to do that for us. But if creating more content is what saves journalism, then why don't we just like creating content doesn't create readers, it doesn't create viewers. Creating content that pulls people in does. But that's an argument about mis and disinformation. So, um, hallucination, bias, low quality stuff, other things I decided about. All of these things have different, they're different thoughts and feelings across the board. But mostly, a lot of this stuff has so many question marks around hallucinations and bias and what happens when content is low quality that it's just so much safer to stick to stuff that's on the reporting side or it's on the investigating side. Um, and I think that this talk was probably less negative than most of the time when I talk about this because you all have been here 100 times, right? You know that I think that this stuff is okay, but I just wanted to fearmonger a little bit. So, is it actually a dead end for responsible journalism? Depends on what you mean by responsible, but most of the time, usually, kind of, somewhat bias and omissions creep in that prevent you from having actual impact. And potentially, they free up time so that you can say, what is the biggest story I can do where I don't have to waste time on, little tiny baby stories. But are people reading those tiny baby stories anyway? I have no idea. Um, I don't know. In the end, who knows? It's all a mystery. It's all a mystery. Also, welcome to my house. This used to be a closet. I tore it down, and now it's just a bunch of holes in my wall. So what? And if we got any questions? We have questions here. I'm gonna hide this thing that's on top of my head. Questions, comments, suggestions. We did such a better job at ending almost by 11:30 today. Yes, Sleater Kinney. Okay, so I will have another. We'll be back on Thursday. Um, the Thursday session is, oh, we're halfway done. Thursday session is everything AI that is not a large language model. So this is probably going to bleed over into the last section, um, because there's just there's so much. I shouldn't have said it's everything, but like we'll be okay. We'll cover a subset of it. Um, so yeah, so from the chat, I think LLM companies or AI companies will have you believe that it's just a matter of time and billions of dollars before all those four horsemen are solved. Yes. So the role of someone like Sam Altman or anyone that runs these companies is twofold. One, they need to raise money. They want more money. They need to raise money to, play games with all their technology. And so by them going out and saying, all of this stuff is great. We're going to solve all of these problems. We're going to have general intelligence and it's going to, solve all the problems in the world. It's going to be great. What they are doing is saying, if you want to get in on this, give us money and give us resources. And so it's just like everything else with AI is they're just hype, 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 hype. And then when they deliver, someone's like, this actually isn't very good. But they already got all their money, so they don't necessarily care about it. The other part of this is they want to strike fear in the hearts of people. So a lot of these problems can be kind of somewhat solved by running models locally on your own machine, which, as I've said, we're going to talk about next week. These AI companies don't necessarily want you to do that. So what they say is this is like a nuclear bomb. Is this stuff is so powerful, it's going to change the world, and if you have the ability to run this in your basement, from your basement, you're going to wage a war of disinformation, destabilize everything in the world, and the world's going to blow up. And they argue for regulatory moats around the work that they do so that other people can't come in and kind of we're going to be working just for or in the service of those corporate overlords. So things like bias would be baked into all of our products, and we wouldn't be able to kind of adjust it or analyze it in the way that you can with local models. What's LopenAI and Buddy's doing regarding academia archives? Are they also trying to get it for free to train their models? I don't know the answer for that, honestly. I mean, I'm assuming the answer is yes. I'm assuming all they do is try to do it. Um, but the details, they escape me, not necessarily my world. So I will say, spoiler for Thursday. Thursday is going to be great because we're not talking about large language models. We're talking about using a place called Hugging Face, which is where a bunch of tech lives on the internet, a bunch of fun AI stuff. And I figured out how to hook it up into Google Sheets. So I had always thought this was going to be a very Python heavy session, but no, we are going to have completely approachable stuff on Thursday, even if you're not a coder at all. Yes, sure. Why not? Why not? It'll be great. So thanks for coming out today. Thanks for your questions. I will see you all on Thursday. Hopefully, I'll be in my office that time. See ya.